We welcome you all to the National Policy Conference on Women's Access to Decent Work. Our event is organized by the Institute of Policy Studies of Sri Lanka and funded by Co-Impact. I am Kimuthu, Research Officer at IPS, and I will be your host for the evening. Decent work encompasses more than just having a job. It involves a comprehensive evaluation of job and employment quality. This concept is multifaceted, emphasizing employment, social protection, workers' rights, and social dialogue. Sustainable Development Goal 8 also emphasizes the importance of ensuring decent work for all. However, Sri Lanka, with its long-standing issue of low female labor force participation, faces numerous context-specific barriers to promoting decent work. Against this backdrop, the Institute of Policy Studies of Sri Lanka is hosting a national policy conference on women's access to decent work in Sri Lanka to discuss means of improving access to decent work for women. IPS will also take this opportunity to disseminate the findings of a recent study funded by Co-Impact with expertise provided by Partnership for Economic Policy on women's access to decent work in Sri Lanka, addressing context-specific barriers. In the first session of the event, Dr. Lakmini Fernando, Research Fellow at IPS, will present the research findings. On the second session, it will entail two panel discussions, one on creating decent jobs in Sri Lanka and the other on the national policy for daycare centers and its impact on women's access to decent work. The program will be streamed live on the IPS official YouTube channel, and our research team will be tweeting live as the event unfolds at Talk Economics SL and at PEP Network. You can join the conversation using the hashtag DecentWorkLK. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Nisha Arunatilaka, Director of Research at IPS, to introduce the theme of today's program.
So, good afternoon, all of you. I also want to warmly welcome you to the National Policy Conference on Women's Access to Decent Work in Sri Lanka, addressing context-specific barriers. So, this 35%, the number 35%, you're all very familiar with that. That's the female labor force participation. Around that has been fluctuating throughout the last decade or even earlier than that. And actually, successive governments have been very concerned about this number, and they have done a lot of policy initiatives to try to improve that. Actually, some of us were even in a presidential task forces trying to come up with policies to improve that number. But today, we are talking not about just women's participation in the labor force, but improving women's access to decent work. Now, decent work is work that includes, that pays an adequate wage, that includes social protection and good conditions of work and social justice. It is very multifaceted. There are a lot of different factors when you talk about decent work. Now, you know this picture. Now, this is what we always think about when we are talking about women's access to decent work. You know, the fact that women bear the bigger burden of household duties and care duties, and the fact that it is difficult for them to engage in work activities. But related to that, there are a lot of other things happening that is also hindering women's access to decent work. So one thing is the fact that women are more responsible for these duties. The employers also take that into consideration when they are looking for recruiting workers. So that affects labor demand. And the legislation in Sri Lanka, if you look at it, it is actually costlier to hire a female than a male. For example, if they go on maternity leave, the employer has to bear the cost of maternity leave, because in some countries, actually, what ILO recommends is it should come from some fund. But in Sri Lanka, it's the employer, so it is actually costlier. Also, in the factories, you have to provide added security, matrons, all these different legislation, which makes it a bit costlier to hire females. So there again, the tendency is for favoring men. So other problem that we have in Sri Lanka is we have limited decent jobs. Lakshmi will show you it is less than 10% of the work in Sri Lanka are decent work. And when these employers prefer males over females, the access to this work for females it is even harder for them to access. So let's say somehow they get a job, even then they're held back by their responsibilities back home, which makes it difficult for them to be engaged in this work. They can't stay after work hours to attend meetings. So, these things are taken into account by the employers when you give promotions. So that affects your career path. So there are all these things also related to, the fact that the role played by women in terms of bearing these higher responsibilities of childcare and other household duties, which affects the demand for female workers, their promotions, their engagement in the workplace. And so this is what we want to talk about today. We have conducted a year-long study, and there are so many things that you need to do to improve women's access to decent work. We are not going to talk about all of them, but we chose two main topics to focus on because we identified these as being the most important. So those are the two panels that Kim was talking about earlier. First, we'll listen to a summary of the findings from the study, and then we'll go to the panels. Thank you.
Therefore, without further delay, I would like to cordially invite Dr. Lakshmi Fernando, Research Fellow at IPS, to present the findings of the recent study, Women's Access to Decent Work in Sri Lanka, Addressing Context-Specific Barriers.
Thank you, Kimtu. Good afternoon to you all. I'll be presenting the results of our research and the policy implications. The study is on women's access to decent work in Sri Lanka. So these are the contents of my presentation, and I'll start with what motivates our study. Actually, it is needless to say that inequality results in adverse economic, social, and political consequences. So if the society is equal only, and if you have a strong economy, you can provide better employment opportunities and better living conditions to your citizens. So when we looked at the history, despite many improvements in the education, fertility, and income, we have observed that women's labor force participation still remains very low. And for Sri Lanka, it is around 31% in year 2021. And when it comes to access to decent jobs, it is even more depressing because we have observed many women choose to engage in poor quality jobs. That means these jobs have fewer work hours and low wages, and there is no social protection. Having recognized the importance of this concept, the decent work, the United Nations Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development Goals, they have dedicated one global goal for this decent work, and it is SDG 8. On that particular goal, what they are saying is that by 2030, we need to achieve full and productive employment and decent work, not only for women, but also for men. So we have observed that discrimination in labor market is driven by country-specific characteristics. Therefore, it is very important for us to conduct single country studies to come up with tailor-made policy prescriptions that support gender parity and inclusive labor market creation. So we'll look at what's happening in the gender patterns of employment at 3 levels, that is global, regional, at national level. So this is from the Global Gender Gap Index published by the World Economic Forum. This is actually give you an idea about gender parity across 146 countries. And Sri Lanka's situation is not that good. We rank in the 115th position, and our score is below the world average. And before going into further discussion, we need to understand what is decent work, how it differs from a normal job. So there are so many different definitions for decent work from many organizations. In our study is based on the International Labour Organization's definition, which was introduced in 1999, and further it has evolved more. And decent work refers to jobs that provide workers with dignity, equality, fair wages, and safe working conditions. So this concept itself is multidimensional. So those people who are worked in decent work, they have more say in their work, and they are more empowered and are protected from discrimination. So the workplace rights, employment opportunities, social protection, and freedom for social dialogue are some of the main components of this concept, decent work. So as I said, that decent work is a multidimensional concept, and there is no single indicator to measure the decent work. So in our study, following the literature, we have used formal full-time employment to measure decent work. And this formal full-time employment is a subset of non-vulnerable employment. In the non-vulnerable employment, we have persons who worked as paid employees from both the public and the private sector and their employers. And this excludes contributing family workers and the own account workers. And when it comes to decent formal full-time employment, we use 3 indicators. The formal organization means for Sri Lanka is that particular organization should be registered one, and it should maintain written accounts, and there should be more than 10 regular employees, and the employees are protected from retirement and other benefits like EPF and ETF. And the second indicator, it thinks about the adequacy in wages. So according to the National Minimum Wage Act, which was published in 2016, the minimum wage for Sri Lanka is 10,000, and there is a budgetary allowance to match the living cost, and it is 3,500. So minimum wage for Sri Lanka is around rupees 13,500. And the third indicator, it covers the working hours. We consider a person is having decent work hours if it is less than 8 hours per day or less than 45 hours a week. So now we are going to look at what is the situation in our country. So in all these categories, you can see the blue bars are for female and the red bars are for females, and the blue bars are contributing very much higher than the females. So we see the problem, and the last 3 categories, that is for the decent work indicators, and you can see that compared to the first 3 bars, there is a clear differentiation, because access to decent work is not only a women's problem, but it is a problem for men as well for Sri Lanka. However, it is more prominent among women than men. And this is again kind of a segregation according to the gender, sector, and education. As I have already explained, the contribution to non-vulnerable and the formal sector employees, it is higher for the male compared to female. And when it comes to sectoral level segregation, that means considering the geographical location, you can see that non-vulnerable employment is very much higher for the estate sector, and it is the lowest for the rural sector. And from the formal work, it is again highest from the urban, second it is rural, and last it is the estate. When it comes to education level, it is quite interesting to see that with increased level of education, when you have a degree or above, both non-vulnerable employment and decent work participation have been increasing. And from this figure, what we wanted to tell you is that we have compared the employment type and the link between the employment type and the average wages. What we prefer to see is higher blue bars from the formal employment, and the triangles should be highest because highest average wages, it is the preferred one. So from this picture, you can see that particular the thing that we wanted to see is coming from the middle section. So that means highest average wages are from the services subsectors, that is from the services sector. For example, from the information and communication technology, financials and insurance, so forth and so forth. But one thing we need to understand is that the contribution to employment from these subsectors is low. And other than the subsectors that are giving you a public sector presence. So as policymakers, what we need to understand is that creating jobs in the public sector is good, but it should not exceed certain limits. And we need to think about subsectors that are giving good quality jobs that can create positive structural change in our economy. So what is the aim of this particular study? We have already observed that Sri Lanka have persistent gendered labour market segregation, whether it is at occupational level or whether it is at sectoral level. So what we need to understand is that what drives this change. So we need to examine the impact of context-specific barriers on women's participation in decent work in Sri Lanka. And our study mainly considers 4 dimensions, that is economic factors, the legal environment, socio-cultural norms, and infrastructural barriers. So we wanted to come up with country-specific policy recommendations that support inclusive labour market creation for our country. So in our data and methodology, in our study, we have followed a mixed method approach. This is basically because of the nature of the data and the availability of data. So in the quantitative analysis, we have used the Labour Force Survey 2018 and the Household Income and Expenditure Survey 2019 from the Department of Census and Statistics. So the econometric tool we have used is the HEC probability analysis. And in the quantitative analysis, we have used quantitative analysis was used only for the socio-economic characteristics. That means education, household, and other individual characteristics. And in the qualitative analysis, we have looked at the other 3 dimensions, the legal factors, socio-cultural norms, and the physical infrastructures. And we have used key informant interviews under 3 broad categories, that is decision makers, advisors and influencers, and the beneficiaries. And we have already conducted 21 interviews using semi-structured KII guides. So these are the results. So results for the quantitative analysis. Because of the time limitation, we are showing you only a part of the results. So what we can see is that access to decent work for women increases with the education and the composition of the households. The 3 columns are for the 3 indicators we have used in the study, and you can observe clearly that with the increased level of education, the probability of women in access to decent work is increasing. And if you have a degree or above level of qualification, the probability ranges between 40 to 60%. And it is quite interesting to see that if a woman is literate in English language, there is a probability of 4 to 6% for them to have more access to decent work. And when it comes to household characteristics, when the household head is a male formal worker, and if the household has elderly female, there is a tendency and the probability is higher for women to engage in decent work. That means if the household head is male formal worker, means we can think that he may have more open attitude towards women employment, women engaged in labor force participation. And second, if it is elderly female in your house, that means she is supporting the women with household activities and care responsibilities. So in contrast, when you looked at the factors that lower the access to decent work, that comes from unemployment and the agricultural employment. Unemployment, it is obvious and there is no need to discuss about that factor. But when it comes to agricultural employment, we need to think again here as policymakers. What we need to do is that, because women, agriculture sector is the second largest sector where women choose to work. So there is a long due discussion regarding the productivity and efficiency improvement in the agriculture sector itself. So we need to think about, if you wanted to create good jobs, quality improvement and productivity improvement in the sectors that are where women choose to work is very important. And these are the results from the qualitative analysis. We have observed that constitutional or the legal provisions in our country is fair enough, and it ensures the fair treatment of men and women. However, the deficiencies are there when it comes to the law enforcement, and also when it comes to traditional view on gender role. We can't be very happy, because as Asian countries or these Eastern countries, there is perception that the household activities or the care responsibility, it is only for women. We need to change these things. And these factors, the gravity of these factors is that these factors have prevented women holding senior positions in decision-making committees and labor unions, though ultimately what's happening is that when it comes to policy making, women's input is very low. And finally, when it comes to deficiencies in physical infrastructure, is another important thing which have reduced women access to decent work, particularly the daycare facilities and public transport. If there are no good quality daycare facilities and if you don't have safe public transport, women choose to or forced to stay at home rather than going out for work. And finally, this is the most important part, the policy implications. First and foremost, it is the improved access to education. We know that Sri Lanka is very blessed to have a very good education system, but we need to think in a very different way. And if we are to support positive change, positive structural change in our economy, that should come from education. It should be innovative, and we should support that kind of thinking from the policymakers as well. And second, we need to invest in sectors that create good quality jobs. As we discussed even in earlier, what we need to think is that it is not just creation of jobs. What we need to do is creation of good quality jobs. As a country that going through a very hard economic terms, what we need to understand is what are the sectors that Sri Lanka has competitive advantage. Most importantly, like sectors in subsectors, the services subsectors that we talked about, the ICT, and also like the tourism, but not all the tourism sectors may be useful or competitive for Sri Lanka. Maybe the wellness tourism, that depends on the Ayurvedic. There's a lot of things as policymakers we can discuss and choose to do. And then we need to think about modernizing, enforcing gender sensitive and gender equal legislation. And we need to support women's participation in decision-making bodies. Then there will be more prioritization for that women-friendly, if I use the word women-friendly, making women-friendly policies at the higher table. So finally, it is again awareness building to reduce social biases. This again a responsibility of the education sector and the media. Education itself can do a big job, and when it comes to media, they have a bigger role to play. And we should not forget that media can make or destroy societies. And finally, in conclusion, what I can say is that in year 2023, the Nobel Prize winner, Professor Claudia, her study is very much similar to our one. She has done her study to find out what are the drivers behind labor force participation for women in USA. And she has observed the data from 18th century. So among many factors, what she has found is the innovation of contraceptive pills is one of the major turning point that enhances women participation in this labor force participation. For Sri Lanka, from our study, we could say, but this needs more discussion, but still we can say that in order to enhance women's participation, decent work for Sri Lanka, we can think about creation of good quality jobs and providing good quality infrastructure, especially the child care facilities and safe public transport. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Lakmini. So for the first panel of the evening on the theme, Creating Decent Jobs for Women, I cordially invite the following individuals to the head table. Mr. Neelakant Vaninayaka, Executive Director at the Industrial Service Bureau, Ms. Kaini Herath-Dialvis, First Vice Chairperson, Women's Chamber of Industry and Commerce, Ms. Arathi Arunachalam, Program Manager, Gender and Economic Inclusion, International Finance Corporation, and Dr. Nisha Arunatilaka, Director of Research at IPS. The session will be moderated by Dr. Nisha. And before we start, I would like to inform the members of the audience that you will also be given an opportunity to share your insights related to the session theme. So here are some technical instructions for the flow interventions. Please press the button located on the right side of your seats to activate the microphone before asking a question. The panel chair will decide the order of interventions. Also, feel free to introduce yourselves. If your question is for a specific panelist, direct it to the respective individual. Thank you very much, and over to you, Dr. Nisha.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't want this to be a panel discussion per se, because we have very participants. It should be just a discussion. We have chosen this panel based on the experience that they can bring to this subject area. We are talking about creating decent jobs. So if you look at Sri Lanka's job profile, which I really did for the state of the economy, which is available in the markets if you wanted to buy it. If you're outside of the Western province, 30% of the jobs are still in agriculture. And you know, agriculture jobs, they don't pay very well and they don't come with social security. And even outside of that, there is some jobs in construction, some jobs in trade and transport. So there are also, most of these jobs are informal sector jobs. They pay a little bit more than what agriculture pays, but still not a lot. So this is what we want to talk about. And in this regard, my first panelist, Neelakant Vaninayaka. Now he has been working in the Northwestern province for over 30 years, trying to improve jobs, productivity of jobs. Let me introduce him so you will see what he has been doing in the Northwestern province. So as Kimutu said, he's the CEO of the Industrial Services Bureau of Northwestern province. And he has a master's degree in industrial development from University of East Anglia. And he has worked in numerous regional and national development projects, including the National Policy of Industrial Development, Sri Lanka Ministry of Industries and Agriculture Sector Modernization Project, and he has been a consultant and a coordinator for National Policy for Industrial Development. And also he has 30 years of experience in policies and strategies for investment promotion, industrial development, economic development, enterprise development. So he's well qualified to tell us, given all these initiatives that we have been doing in the Northwestern province, Why do you think still creating good jobs is a problem? What is your experience? And what else should be, we have Mr. Kumar Singh also in the audience, so you can directly influence the policymakers. Like what policies are needed to improve job creation outside, especially outside the city?
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Nisha Arnatilaka. In fact, it's honored and privilege to share my thoughts, of course, as you said. So this the real August gathering. I mean, there are leading, the experts from public and private sector. Anyway, so to start my, the thoughts, I just wanted to start with a very nice the cartoon, which was posted in the social media. The two gents and two ladies, they were on a race. They wanted to go for a race, but in the ladies, the pathway, there's barriers. So the post, I was really inspired. So this is what we have to look at it. So what sort of problems or rather the issues or challenges faced by the ladies or other women. So that let me start with that part. To answer your question, Dr. Nisha. So what I see, I mean, even now, I certainly would like to explain this with SDG goal number 5 and goal number 8. And in SDG goal number 5, one of the target is to, without having a proper economic growth. So this is what I see. I mean, even the first target, we need to maintain a minimum of 7% GDP growth to have a decent work. So that is what the first target mentioned in the SDG. Now we have to analyze where are we right now. I mean, even we are in a crisis situation. Even the post-crisis situation, we were not in a proper way. We are not in a right path to have a rapid economic growth. So that is the one area what I have to come up with you. And then even you see, I mean, even the person from the region. So I have seen. I don't see any the productivity or the quality improvement or any diversification or sort of innovation or the creativity in some of the SMEs we see. So there are a number of SMEs. We see that there are a number of SMEs, but the productivity, the quality consciousness, and also the innovation, the value creation, the value addition are very low, very low. I mean, even to I mean, I'm not just come up with my gut feeling, but I certainly could come up with the findings of the industry diagnosis report. We have engaged in for about nearly 6 to 1 year to do a comprehensive industry diagnosis for the industry policy study. We have been assigned by the Ministry of Industries. So there we have earmarked 10 issues, or rather the barriers in industrialization. Let me introduce these things with the barriers for industrialization, because this is the area where I certainly could. Well, I'm a bit scared to have three ladies in the panel who are certainly strong in gender-related aspects, but I'm not. And so, number one, what we have encountered, what we have identified was the unfriendly policy and regulatory environment. That is number one. And number two, the equally, I mean, in all the levels. So we have been discussing the access to finance and credit. That was also we have earmarked as one of the main issues. I mean, these. I mean, we have done 1,500 the questionnaire survey covering the entire 9 provinces and the whole industry sector from micro level up to the corporate sector. And then we had for about 50 focus group discussions and then 25 key informant interviews. So with that only we have came up with these issues. And number three, inefficient and costly infrastructure and logistics, and especially, I mean, if you really focus on these issues, it's not particularly to the Western province. As you know, the Western province is, we are still contributing more than 40% to the GDP. I mean, but you can't compare Western province with the other provinces. I mean, still, fortunately, the northwestern, southern, and the central province contribute around 10% to GDP, but yet there are a lot of improvements to do. And number two, lack of technology and innovation. Number four, lack of innovation and technology transfer. And similarly, we have not seen proper the entrepreneurial culture. Entrepreneurial culture, education, skills, and knowledge. So that's, so what we see has to be started from school. I mean, even when you compare with the region, so we are well below the entrepreneurship, the index. We are well below. I'm not coming. I don't really need to come up with the figures. You all know. So where are we now? And so, as I explained, the lack of value creation, backward and forward integration. Now, there are a number of initiatives taken by the government and even some of the donor agencies, but we see the huge barrier. I mean, especially in terms of the SMEs. So we don't see any backward and forward linkages even up to the export market. So that's very important. So that's one of the key issues we have identified.
Okay, thank you. Your time is up, so maybe during the discussion, if you have any more inputs, you can do. I want to now turn to Sky Alvis. So she is the Vice Chairperson of Women's Chamber of Industry and Commerce, and she has an MBA from, she's a chemical engineer to start, which is an unusual profession for female. But she has also an MBA from Postgraduate Institute of Management and an MSc in Food Process Engineering from the University of Beijing. But she has also broken the glass ceiling, I would say. She's the Director of Customer Service Management Committee. She has been in Unilever Sri Lanka, and she is currently an independent non-executive director at Singer Sri Lanka. But not only the ceiling, I think there are some things she has broken glass walls as well, because she is the immediate past Global Women in Logistics and Transport chairperson. She's about actually taking women to professions, occupations that are not very normal for them or usual for them. So that is another problem that we have in Sri Lanka, this gender segregation in the workplace. So women tend to go to certain types of jobs, like teachers, or sometimes doctors or nurses, or low-skill service sector jobs like clerks. So I just want to ask you guys, what have you been doing to change this gender segregation in the labor market, and what can Sri Lanka do so that there is more access to women in jobs that are not traditional?
So thank you, Nisha, for this organizing this policy conference. I think, as you very rightly said, even in your study also, that actually was discussed also. So, I mean, there are certain roles that, I mean, from our childhood days, like parents say, okay, this is not for you, you only have to do this part and all of that. So, luckily for me, we didn't have that issue at home. So, for me, gender was a non-issue. So, you might think that, okay, it was a job, but it was not the case. At home, it was like that. But when you enter the world of work, certain jobs, especially in engineering, when I was doing, we had only 22 out of 200. So like that, for me, it was not an issue. But when you enter the world of work, this problem crops up. So when I moved from engineering to then logistics and supply chain, 2019 study done by UNSCAP says that our industry only had 3.4% women. So that was the case. Out of 500,000, we have only 3% of women there. So that is a problem. But supply chains, logistics, power our economy that we all got to know during COVID. So what we exactly did was, I was part of Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport. So at that time we realized we have low participation of women. How do we get more women into the world of work? So then when we went into university schools, we realized the awareness on the opportunities available in logistics industry was very low. Because we all feel sometimes, okay, this is a macho job, you have to work 24/7.
and it's female unfriendly, all these things because of societal pressure, plus what you see on TV, what you see in all the other media, come to your mind. So therefore, not very many young girls would like to come out to these specific jobs. So so in 2013, after leaving Unilever at that time, I formed and started Digital Logistics and Transport, the Women in Logistics and Transport. Actually, when we went into universities and schools, we realized that not many women understood what the profession entails. So what we started telling them is you don't need to work long hours, there are many jobs that are available which actually women can get into, but if you don't like, then you can move to other areas later on once you know about it. So creation of awareness was a big issue. So first of all, attraction is the most important thing. So what we did was we did these road shows and all of that so that more women knew what the opportunities lie for them when they enter the world of work. Then once you get into the work, sticky flow is there. So get more women into the world of work. And then once you are there, you retain them. The problem is in our country, most women, when they get into the world of work, they are old, so they want to quickly get married, so they want to drop out, although we have 64% of women coming out of universities, but labor force participation is only 33%. So what we wanted was, how do we retain them? So we started this mentoring program in 2014. We celebrate our 9th anniversary. So now we've seen, by engaging with the industry leaders, men and women, you start mentoring these young girls and also boys also now to show the opportunities that are there. So then when I was appointed as a global president, what we did was, especially during the height of COVID, to retain women, we need to develop capacity because you need to, future-ready skills have to be inculcated in the minds of everyone. So we started creating a virtual capacity building center so that you retain them and then there will be progression as well. So, it's a combination of mentoring, giving guidance, giving opportunities, and also, I'm happy that we have a male in our panel today, and I'm sure he's a she for she. We need strong male advocates in our fold. So when you have that, then the conscious and unconscious biases that we have, can be, removed to a great extent. All of us have our own biases, so we need to do that. So we didn't want to do it with only men. So today also we have a lot of men here. So otherwise we are preaching to the converted all the time. So we need strong male advocates to support us in this agenda. So we work with transport authorities because you need to prevent these sexual harassment, all that is happening in the workplace and in the transport, bystander interventions. How do we really get more people to support in the whole work so that women feel that I have the right ecosystem to manage? So I'll give you one, I think my time is slowly getting closer to the 4 minutes. So I'll give you one example, clear example where in the port, I don't know whether any of you know about that, 2017, up until very recently, till 2017, in the port of Sri Lanka, we cannot have women working after 6 p.m. So that was the norm. So then then Minister of Ports and Shipping at that time in 2017 in the Mahapala training center in the port, actually he recruited 20 women to work as gantry crane operators. It's a hardcore port area. 20 odd women was brought in, and then why they didn't have that ecosystem was, the port is a huge area and it's not safe. You also spoke about that issue here. Ecosystem was not conducive for women to work because you didn't have changing rooms, facilities, all of that. So men were roaming around bare-bodied and all of that. So it was unsafe plus not conducive. So luckily there was support and they were trained and all of that. Yet I'm happy to say now already 6 years gone. Of course, some have dropped out, but we have for the past 5 to 6 years, we have 10 women, doing the job with men, and actually the productivity of men in a positive way has gone up because they are properly dressed now, not in a bad way. In fact, these are examples. So you need to have the strong support from the political leadership plus the societal support, and sensitizing the society is very, very important through TV, all of these medias, and that will really reinforce. So we have noticed this in our industry. I'm sure this can be replicated in other areas. I'm not talking about only in Sri Lanka. In 39 countries, we have replicated this globally as well. So it's possible, it can be done.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So last of all, let me turn to Aarti Arunachalam, She's a program manager, gender and economics inclusion, IFC Sri Lanka. She also worked outside of Sri Lanka, in Kenya and South Africa. Yes. She specializes in addressing barriers for women in accessing quality jobs. That's what we're talking about, and also financial and non-financial services and value chain inclusion. So all of these and what Danny was talking about also creates barriers that makes it harder for women to access good jobs. So let me ask you, given your experience, to what extent have you been able to close the gender gap in private sector workforce? Which were the primary challenges faced?
Thanks, Dr. Nisha, and hello everyone. Congratulations on your findings. I guess you have really talked a lot about the challenges that was really addressed in that lens. But I think what I can probably bring to the table is from a private sector perspective, what is it that we have been doing? That is, when I say we, IFC, in partnership with the Australian government, was working on a $9.5 million program specifically to advance gender barriers so that it's good for business, good for the economy, and for the community on a large scale. So, and I guess when you look at challenges, there were multiple. And if I were to simply put it, I guess probably 6 years ago, it was like, not sure how many of you all would have been in that situation where you have a remote control with 50 buttons, and when you want to change the channel, you just can't change, right? So that is exactly where we were, and we had to really prioritize and see what exactly do we want to address, because there are multiple challenges, right? And we created this particular remote control, which had 3 buttons in it. So that was basically the 3 pillars that the program was fundamentally kind of designed. One is to provide better access to quality and accessible jobs, both for women as employees and for leaders as well. The second pillar was around access to finance and non-financial services, and that's where we've done a lot of work, especially when you were talking about your entrepreneurship space. We worked with the central bank on the National Financial Inclusion Strategy for the first time in the country, where we brought in a gender lens. And yesterday we were in Jaffna with the managing director of the World Bank, where we really saw a lot of great stories that was actualizing on the ground, where we were with a few entrepreneurs from commercial bank who are actually driving on the forefront, being like a fitness instructor to construction businesses and so on and so forth. So I think the story there is where we need to have more entrepreneurs growing from micro to small businesses to medium and larger businesses as well. The third pillar was around strengthening the linkages in supply chain and bringing women the entire value chain altogether, which probably Gani kind of addressed. So when we really break it down and come to the quality workforce, right? When we look at employment more broadly, I think a couple of things we did well is the fact that we were able to tap into firm level advisory. So with a particular company, we did like a gender diagnostics tool to understand what are the gaps, where do you need help, okay, and this is how we can support you in kind of creating a better working environment, and you get the results that you require, right? So that's a firm level. And then the second thing we did is we looked at the sector-wise, there are different gaps versus when you look at it from a country as a whole, right? So that's when we kind of had e-learning platforms, and we started off with a platform called She Works. We had Tanuja from MAS, who was also one of our clients in it. It was basically where we looked at how do we get more women recruited, retained, and promoted by creating the right enabling work environment. So it started off where we had 12,000 more women employed over a period of 3 years. And that was kind of a very good success story. And then what happened was many other companies reached out, and we were like, okay, there are medium-sized companies and we also need help, right? And we also have the same challenges on the ground. And then we said, okay, you know what? Let's take this to a larger set of market, and that's where we created the Together We Can campaign, where Samurti, my colleague here, was actually leading it. And that is where we brought in more than 40 companies around the country. And what we realized is that IFC alone cannot tackle this challenge. We need partners, we need local stakeholders who can really take this, drive it so that the sustainability scale up and so on and so forth. So we partnered with the Federation Chamber of Commerce for it. And like that, every other interventions that we have been a part of, yes, we work with the private sectors, but we work a lot with many other partners who can really take this forward in a more sustainable manner. The second thing is we look at theme-based intervention. So here, the tackling childcare, respect for workplace, all that was spoken about. But just to give you all an alarming number is when you look at the Eastern Province, the number of days lost due to lack of childcare facility is 30 days per employee per year. And that is, mind you, it's larger than the annual year holiday that you can take, right? And this translates into millions of dollars that we're talking about in terms of losses. So right now we're working with Sarvodaya, who is our main partner, who's bringing in multiple lines of intervention there, and Commercial Bank, who's also supporting us from an infrastructure lens, and we are opening up a first daycare center facility in Batiklo, which is going to be on the 21st of November. So this is just one per se. And lastly, I just want to say that when it comes to respectful workplaces, right? So again, we are losing $1.7 million per year for an organization when it comes to employees not feeling safe due to sexual harassment, bullying, and online violence at work. So there needs to be something that definitely has to be done. So there is a set of training, bystander intervention trainings that IFC has designed, and we're working with partners like the CLK and JAF, and who is in turn taking these trainings and converting it more as a service per se. But all these are kind of also great tools because there's business interventions which we can look at opportunities, how you can translate that into policy advocacy.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry to cut you short, but I want to also hear from the audience, so the discussion is open. Anyone wanting to contribute, if you have ideas, experiences, please share with us. Also, you can ask questions, but it's not really about asking questions and answering. Yes, please. Please introduce yourself as well.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I just also want to say please keep your interventions short so that we can give opportunity to a lot of.
Yeah, my name is Dr Saman. I'm a journalist in Sun Times. Recently, the government approved night work for women. Now, what was discussed here is also about the safety aspect. Can you just tell us about what interventions need to be done to ensure that women are safe during night work?
So my reaction to that question is actually you need to make sure everybody is safe, not only. So you can't be paternalistic about this. It's not. So you have to have a safe environment for everybody to be safe, and also there should be legislation. If they are not safe, there are reasons for that. So there should be legislation to make working environment safe. Right.
Can I?
Yes.
In fact, so what I see, so this sort of a positive approach. I mean, especially the policy level. Now, even I don't know whether you have seen the areas they have especially opened up: IT, KPO, PPO, accounting, administration, and technical aspects. So maybe it's specifically for, I would say, the decent jobs. So rather than the shop floor, I mean, it's very important. I mean, these things, I mean, especially with regard to the safety issues, of course, we are living the globalized environment. So we need to go with the world. And then, so I see it's a very positive sign at the policy level.
Yes.
name is Dileni Kunawardana from the University of Pennsylvania. I just want to thank the panelists for sharing. It's fantastic to know there is such exciting work going on, and especially Kylie, so impressed in how they're able to do. My question is actually coming as a teacher rather than a researcher in this case, which is to say, do you feel that there are skills that young people nowadays lack? And do you think that women lack more than men? I mean, you guys talked about the demand side and the barriers that are there on the demand side. What more needs to be done on the supply side? How can we sort of prepare these women to face the world of work?
So let's collect a few questions to save some time. Yes.
I'm the Deputy Commissioner in Chambers from the Department of Labor. Since that the journalist asked about the legal provisions of the females working in the night, that's why I switched on the mic. Anyway, the legal provision, is it okay if I explain the legal provisions?
Please, as I said, this is a discussion, it's not a.
The current law emphasizes the legal protection with respect to the safety and health of the females, and that's why the night work days per month is limited to 10 days. And for the safety matters, there should be a female warden for the protection of the females, and there should be restrooms and should be given 1.5 times of the day's payment. That's the legal aspect from the financial side. That is for the protection. And no female would be employed against the consent of the employee. That's how the legal system is there as per the law.
So yeah, that is the kind of law that I have issue with actually. Partly because you're not actually then taking action to prevent unsafe behavior among other people. You're actually putting in place safeguards to make sure that so that is why it is costlier for employers to hire females, because you have to hire the matron and you have to have all the safeguards. It is better to have legislation to make the workplace a safe place. There are people who are breaking those laws, and you should punish those or take action so that you don't.
My ministry and the General Secretary is also here. That's why the Ministry of Labour and Foreign Employment has taken steps to amend the laws.
Yeah, that is
the current.
Yeah. So
in the same way, when we said the public transport is unsafe for women, we had a women-only carriage in the train. That shouldn't be the case. No. Again, we should really societal corrections have to be done.
Yeah, some sexual harassment
In buses,
stop that from happening rather than.
and punitive measures.
Thank you. I was I'm kind of very interested to know whether you actually know how you can make that happen in a very highly patriarchal society like ours, right? And where there's a huge impunity for harassment of women, whether it's in the workplace or anywhere else, and where domestic violence and everything is so high. But that was not really my question. My question was, I was really interested in hearing what you said about how decent work can be created and the initiatives that the panelists described. But there still remains a huge number of people, women in this country, who are in precarious jobs, who are working in precarious jobs. And is there some way that we can actually think about not only creating decent jobs, but transforming these precarious jobs into decent work. I'm Priyanti, by the way, I'm a women's rights activist.
So let's take these questions. Now there were several ones. One was on from the lady about skills. Yes.
Yeah, I'll talk about it. I mean, it is also said the recent World Economic Forum document says that 80% of the jobs that will pan out in 2030, we haven't even thought about it. So, I mean, in that context, we have to look at in our education system, especially in the universities. I mean, after 4 years or 3 years when they come out, it's irrelevant, it's outdated. So we need to, from that angle, look at what kind of future-ready skills we are developing. So I would say, I mean, in what is there in the literature and what people talk about and practically what I have experienced is digitalization is a great equalizer for women. So we need to get more women to involve in digital literacy. I mean, coding, even coding for that matter. Now there are lots of MOOCs we can learn without any, payment, so those are available. So I think women and men both should be encouraged to do these things. And critical thinking skills, analytical skills, problem solving is the biggest thing in this country. So we have to start educating simple problem solving, tools, techniques, how can be done. And again, emotional intelligence aspect, because you can convert our whole factories into automate and robots can be there, and then you need to manage robots as well. So how do we use that emotional connection, because you need to deal with people, relationship building, so women are good at that. So how do we really look at those aspects? So I think most of us with ChatGPT and all of that, everything can be now, copy paste and do everything like that. So how do we make us younger generation equip themselves with future ready skills, especially in these simple problems? Resilience, agility, flexibility, all those things are things that we need to develop. So working with the industry really helps. So bring the industry people, expose them into the industry environment. Sometimes a practical example, like when we teach some of the lecturers, I see them showing pictures and say, this is how a warehouse look like. But when you go to a warehouse is very different. So you take them to do a field study and show them how a forklift truck operates. How do you use, basic, even the drones are being used in some warehouses to do counting. So how do we give that exposure early stage in their career, so they will think in the first year itself, okay, this is where I should go and work. Otherwise, after 4 years, they'll ask, madam, which area should I work? After finishing 4 years, they're asking, right? So I think we need to, from day one, educate them how to learn. I think that's something that we need to really, educate them, expose.
Okay, going back to the second question regarding converting precarious work into better jobs. I don't know which one to turn to. Maybe you can comment on that. I think that is what you've been doing. You talk about innovation, improving productivity, value chain, so you are connecting markets, all of that is doing that. But my main question is, that has been happening for the longest time in Sri Lanka. Why hasn't it actually? But still, it's only under 10% of decent work.
Well, that's a very tough question, right? Because we're doing so much, but is it really trickling? I honestly, at times I don't know the answer, let me be very frank. But what I do know is there are organizations out there who is working towards creating a better enabling environment, and be it, say, you're able to, for example, if there is a mental health related instances, you're able to give that time off to the employee rather than deal with presentism, absenteeism, and then blame it on performance, right? But the larger question then would be, okay, there are a certain set of organizations who probably are able to do it because of the income and things like that. But certain set of industries probably are really thriving with absolute minimum margin, so they might not be able to give that particular access, right? So I think it's the larger organizations are probably at a better situations to provide, so that there's a demonstration impact that's being created. But how can smaller organizations really do on their own? Not too sure, but that's where I think organizations like IFC, the World Bank, come in to maybe through the programs or something like that, where we can give a little bit of push so that they have that particular facility as well. So that's one way. But it's not just us who can really support, right? There's more people who really have to come together. So, like for example, the Women's Chamber of Commerce, right? So they have access to multiple small business holders, right? So maybe, and Guy spoke about the skills that can kind of reach, but maybe those are also different ways where we can reach. But I think there's more to be done, but the short answer for this would be we can't do it together. We all need to come together. We know the problem, but we need to work together.
So what I feel it's long way to go. But first thing, even though it is not mandatory, so there are certain approaches and voluntary. I mean, to give you an example, I mean, the organization where I live, so we have our own gender policy and we have a whistleblower policy. So, I mean, even not at the national level, certain organizations, even at the regional level, they do have these policies and they have adapted. So that's one. And then again, it's important for us to, I mean, especially your conclusion. So it's the three things that you have come up with: the daycare, and the traveling, the transportation. When you go to the scenario in at the Colombo level, and when you go to the estate sector and the rural area, is completely different. So then you really wanted to focus the regions and even the estate sector where the need is it's completely different. So then I really wanted to emphasize the regional level interventions are very much important for decent work.
If I may add something here, now like she mentioned about women's gender, what we do there. So what we realize is the bigger companies, multinationals and conglomerates have their own resource structures to do all of these things. So Nisha and myself were together in one of the task forces in 2017 to increase female labor force participation. In that, we identify 5 areas. In one of the areas is how do we support private sector, not the big companies, the smaller companies, because they don't know how to develop a whistleblower policy or gender parity, whatever policy. So how do we support? So what we did some work in that front as well. So in Women's Chamber, what we're trying to do now is with SMEs. Now we are also discussing with IFC on that to develop a GBVH code. Now when we realize that IFC has already done that, no need to reinvent. So we are trying to work with them on that. So we did a survey. So the problem in our country is we have limited resources. Everybody wants to do their own little bit and take the credit for it. Why can't we all get together? We know what the problems are. We've been talking about it for the last so many years. Now, if we put our energy and resources in solving at least one or two, so we'll all get together and say, I'll do first problem, second problem, third problem, at least we'll be able to solve the problem. Otherwise, for the next 75 years, we will talk about it. So I think, I'm glad that we have strong research findings now. So let's pick up one or two and partner with people who have the reach in the country and identify one area at least and showcase that we've done it in this area, let's replicate in the other area. So that's the problem. Otherwise, we'll talk about it. So we need action. Yes.
So we have almost come to the end of this session. Any other urgent? Yes, please.
Thank you very much. I'm Nirvana Sekar. I work as an independent consultant on gender and social inclusion. And I also represent the Center for Women's Research here. And there are many issues that have come up in the conversation, which I think are very relevant and important to be taken further in very practical steps. One of the things that was always interested me in relation to the whole issue of female women's participation is that we always focus on women in the form of the labor force, and we bemoan the fact that it's 33%. And even I think in this conversation on this we take the framework in the context of women in the formal sector, where there are institutional policy structures which enable a transition from the current status of the lack of research to better conditions. One issue that has always struck me is that we can forget extremely vulnerable as they do contribute, they do make a major contribution to the economy. And yet we tend to forget they exist and don't give sufficient attention to the conditions in which they work. And Priyanka's question, precarious work, I think then refers to that segment which is in extremely dangerous kinds of jobs, for example, like mining, where the conditions are very harsh, and where labor has very little or no say in their conditions. So I've always wondered, how do we extend this conversation on the sort of protection of the labor force, not just women, but the labor force in general, of course including women, because they face particular vulnerabilities and issues. How do we extend that also to the larger sector, women, who sustain the economy, but whose work in productive economic sphere is unrecognized, and at the same time who contribute an enormous amount of amounts of the economy in terms of the unpaid work, which of course is unrecognized, although it is getting more traction as a subject for discussion and debate now.
So the next, I will let Jilani deal with that question, but I think our time is up. So just one final thought, let the panelists talk. One final thought on maybe something for Mr. Kumarasiri to take away, some recommendation for the government to improve decent work.
Yeah, what I see, I always focused on the regional context, not at the national context, being the person from region. So what we see, especially, there are a lot of barriers at the regional level. You can't compare the issues at the national level at the regional level. It's completely different. And especially we onto the project in ADB funded, where this, it's not merely the decent work, to enhance the women participation in the traditional, non-traditional vocational training sectors. One is the electrician, motor mechanism, plumbing, so those kind of non-traditional sectors. But yet, because of the social issues, it's not merely with the young generation. Yeah, so especially with the parents. So then it's very important for us to educate at the parent level. So that's my comment.
Okay,
thank you.
Okay, I'm a very practical person. So for me, what I really want from the government side is that read all the reports that we all have somewhere, put everything into one place. Please pick those ideas and then, do at least one or two and say this is what we did for the women. Okay.
I guess, reading reports is important, but if they don't have the time, right? Because there was the National Data Center Policy, which was something that I think some of us were a part of, and it's still not gazetted, right? So there's so much work that was already done, still in the pipeline. So let's look at the low-hanging fruits, see if that's something we can address, but just pick one or two, like 2 buttons or 3 buttons in the remote control. That's all that we want, and make it work.
My recommendation is when the government, the budget is coming up, when you look at the budget, always when you talk about improving women's workforce participation, it's about giving microfinance or something that is also vulnerable jobs. You need to really think about putting in programs that will create good jobs and that will give access to productive work for women. So really think through what you are recommending and what is incorporated in the budget. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Neelakant, Ms. Aarthi, Ms. Gaini, and Dr. Nisha. You may take your seats. And thank you very much to the audience as well for that engaging discussion. For the final panel of the evening on the topic Women's Access to Decent Work and Childcare, I cordially invite the following individuals to the head table. Ms. Gaini Gomes, Project Manager of Women's Centre Sri Lanka, Ms. Tanuja Jayawardena, General Manager, Women's Empowerment, Advocacy and Code of Conduct at Mars Holdings, Ms. Shanika Malalgoda, Director, Planning and Information, Child Protection Authority, and Professor Dilani Gunawardena, Professor of the Department of Economics and Statistics, Faculty of Arts, University of Peradeniya. Professor Dilani will moderate the session, and the early instructions for the flow interventions apply to this session as well. And I hope the audience will also contribute to this session with the same enthusiasm they showed in the last panel. Over to you, Professor Dilani.
Thank you very much. It's a delight to be here, and thank you very much to Nisha and IPS for inviting me. And I hope we will have as exciting a session as the previous one. We have a great panel here. I will follow Nisha in terms of the structure and the fact that we want to have a discussion as well. But let me introduce the panelists. I think many of them have spoken in these circles before, and they're probably not strangers to you. Tanuja Jayawardena is the General Manager of Women's Empowerment Mars Holdings, and she has a long CV, has practiced corporate law for 12 years, and at Mars, she's been part of their flagship Women's Empowerment and Advocacy Program, Women Go Beyond. She's worked with the Mars legal team for 6 years. She took over as the head of the Women Go Beyond team, and she oversees all initiatives in areas of women's empowerment and gender equality. She has a Bachelor of Arts with specialization in English literature at the University of Colombo, and then she has a law degree from Sri Lanka Law College, and she's worked in a top law firm in Sri Lanka. She's also an actor and works with the English theatre company in Sri Lanka, whenever her work allows at the time. Gaini Gomes is the project manager of Women's Centre. She's a women activist and projects manager. Committed to empowering women, she provides counseling support to survivors of gender-based violence alongside her role as a trainer, resource person on leadership, gender, and SGBV. She has extensive national and international networking experiences, which have further enriched her advocacy efforts. She's honored to serve as an elected governing board member of the Clean Clothes Campaign, South Africa Coalition, which solidifies her commitment to transformational change in the field of women's rights. And then we have Shanika Malalgoda. I want to introduce her as a Peradeniya product. But actually, Shanika she's a sociologist from Peradeniya, both a bachelor's and master's. But she's also done several other masters and other degrees and diplomas as well. She has an LLB, and she's a member of the Chartered Institute of Professional Management. Most importantly, she's the director of Planning and Information at the National Child Protection Authority. So before I turn to the panelists, I thought that I'd frame this discussion in the sense of, I'm an economist, so I'd like to frame it in the sense of why childcare matters from from an economic point of view, and I think Aarti referred to that in the previous section as well. As economists, and I'm sure there are a few here, you learn about production coming from factors of production, and you have capital and you have labor. And nobody stops and thinks where that labor comes from. I mean, when you sort of do macro models, you do labor in, and then when population grows, N grows, right? But population growth means a child is born, and the child doesn't then just jump from the, birth to the labor force. The child is nurtured, right? And that is mostly done in Sri Lanka by families. But when the child is nurtured and enters the labor force, that, all that human capital investment that has gone into that child is used by the corporate sector that hires the child as a labor, no longer a child as a laborer. And it's also benefited by the state because this person ends up paying taxes, right? In some way or the other, if not income taxes, they pay an inflation tax, right? So, the state and the private sector have a responsibility towards childcare. So that's the way I want to approach this discussion. And so Tanja, let me ask you, if you could talk about the challenges that have been faced by MAS in relation to childcare and some of the steps that you might have taken to meet these challenges. I also want to ask you, should childcare benefits be provided or extended to both parents or only women? And what do you think about that?
Thank you, Professor Dimani, for having me, and thank you for the question also. I want to say first that I completely agree with what you're saying in terms of the responsibility and the fact that it just makes sense for communities, for governments, for businesses to really think about how these children are being looked after, brought up, and also developed, and not just left somewhere. It's not that it's not our problem until they become adults. So I completely agree with that. Unfortunately, I think when it comes to the corporate sector, for business, all of that, there is also a feeling of, but that's out of our control, that's not our problem. I'm privileged to say that at MAS, it's always been part of the work we took very seriously because, as you mentioned, we have a program called Women Go Beyond, which completes 20 years this year, focusing on addressing gaps in services, infrastructure, education, skill development, all of those things. Because, of course, we are an industry, built on the backs of women. So you could see the gaps very clearly. We spoke about safety and transport, the ability to come to work. So for us, one of the first things we did 30 years ago was provide transport to all our employees. So they don't have to be taking public transport. That's a whole other problem, but as employers, we were able to do that. With childcare, I want to first say I don't think we have any perfect solutions. We are still on a journey over the last 20 years to try and figure out what works. At the moment, we have 40 locations where we provide some form of childcare support. What I mean by that is in-house creches, which are built and maintained by us, but also a lot of external childcare facilities, which are already there where you can collaborate. A lot of employers, it's not an easy thing. So when you talk about challenges, there's a cost. So many companies will struggle with that because the thing is, when you're profit-making businesses, of course, either you have to have a drive within to say, oh no, we're going to take this responsibility and do this, or it has to be regulated. So in India, for example, it's mandated. So you have to have childcare if you have over a certain number of employees. So unless that happens, either it's mandated and regulated or you decide as an employer, the cost factor becomes probably the biggest conversation. Then, of course, in Sri Lanka especially, there is this whole how to provide suitable childcare. As Aarti mentioned,
The guidelines were developed, still nothing gazetted. So the regulation, the standardization, what is acceptable, what is not, that's a whole other question. So when we also look for childcare providers outside of the office premises, it takes a lot of work to figure out who is responsible, what standards do we adhere to, because then with standards come another cost. There's also liability. If you have childcare within your work premises, your factories, your offices, there's liability. And how do you manage that? How do you make sure things are safe? So at the moment, what's happening is employers in the private sector, not only MAS, quite a few of the larger companies are providing these services, taking it upon themselves to figure out what a good standard is, what the requirements should be and not. Whereas it would be really helpful if there was a proper guideline, which was also reasonable. I think when we set guidelines, sometimes a lot of the questions that came out today are very much connected to that growth, the economic situation, where we are as a country, how do businesses also survive and thrive? If not, it's a cyclical, it's not going to work. So the standards and the requirements need to be practical, need to be ones that can be implemented by companies that are not necessarily the largest companies. So an MAS might be able to and will stick to all of that, put the investment behind it. But if it's difficult for us as well, you can see how then scaling is going to be really difficult. Another challenge other than budget, liability, all of the regulations, is also understanding the different requirements that different workforces have. So we have a factory floor cadre, we have the office worker. At the different locations, so whether it is if you're in Navala and Bhattaramulla and more urban areas, or whether you're in more rural areas, depending on social, economic, community, all of those factors, parents' requirements also tend to be different. So something we're also struggling with is how do you provide different types of childcare where, for a factory worker, it is working really well. We can have a creche in-house or a creche externally. They come in, it's shift-based work. That's a whole other thing, time and to be able to provide childcare at different times. But we have been able to find more solutions at that point. Whereas with the office worker, the requirement is different. You don't want to bring your child to the creche close to office or in office every day. You probably need more backup childcare support. When the parents are not there or when the nanny is not there. So requirements we realize are very, very different. So for companies to identify those and try and find different solutions. So that one solution will not work for everyone. I lost time. Got it. So those are the challenges. And very quickly to your question on whether it should be given to all parents. Absolutely. I mean, whatever childcare is available to men and women both. I really want to make a point here that we need to just do everything we possibly can to move away from that idea that child rearing is only the mother's responsibility. So having more fathers involved in that process, even when it comes to paternity leave, all of that, creating the awareness, breaking all of the barriers and the stereotypes becomes super important. So definitely for men and women both, we have great examples of men, especially in the Northeast, Kirinach area, who really use the childcare and can only work because there is childcare provided.
Thank you very much. And I appreciate hearing from getting the large company perspective, because in some ways I think large companies do set the tone and cultures perhaps can be changed if it starts, at the top. Plus, as large companies, you're not just Colombo based, you have factories all over the country, so you are in the regions as well. Let me move on to Danny, and can you tell us a little bit about the Women's Center and the work you do in terms of women's rights, but especially rights pertaining to childcare? And what does the state need to do What do employers need to do, and how can workers be better protected in the area of childcare rights? And again, women workers only or men workers also?
Okay. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. So I'll be talking with our grassroots level experience. So we are a women's organization based in free trade zones and garment factory areas, and we are the first women organization which was established in 1982 to protect the rights of free trade zone and garment sector workers during its supporting role with the politics garment strike, which was the largest strike at that time. So we have a journey of 4 decades and 40 years where we have overall 20,000 paying members from all over garment factories in Sri Lanka. So we are operating in 12 districts. So basically we have few members, not few actually, we have members from Mars Group Holdings as well. So basically, specialty in this topic is we do have a daycare center in Kadunayaka Free Trade Zone. Due to budgetary constraints, we could not expand into that, but we are looking for that. So this is specifically focusing single mothers' children actually who are working in the free trade zone areas, since these workers are internal migrants from the rural areas and more affected areas. So they are residing in these 10 by 10 boarding houses with their family, and sometimes they are leaving, there is some child care of these workers. They are leaving, the parents are leaving their younger ones to the elder ones who is just 5, 6 years old, and they are staying alone in their boarding houses all over the day. And if not, they are just paying 5,000 rupees with per day meal for a neighbor to take care of their children which is 3 months or 4 months years old. So we cannot accommodate all of these things, but that's why we are especially focusing on single mothers. So this is the general scenario there. So when we talk about, I have some statistics actually, it's really wonderful to talk about this here. According to the statistics at the police headquarters, the numbers and incidents related to child abuse that have occurred in Sri Lanka in 2023 until 30th September, serious crimes against children is 2,331. Minor crimes, I don't know what is the definition for the minor crimes. Crimes against children, 2,092. Sexual harassment of the children is 1,086. So why these actually reliable? Because we just grabbed this information from the police headquarters for a statement which was published day before yesterday. So this is kind of why this is continuously happening in Sri Lanka, how the relevant authorities reacting to these kind of harassment against child or women. Violence is always a violence, right? Not it is not focusing children or women or men. That is violence is always violence. So if you are going to talk about why this is continuously happening and why what is the response toward the government or the relevant authorities is kind of another panel discussion that we have to do. So I don't want to take it that depth. So I think in 2019 also there was a solution to establish government kind of daycare centers in the government's garment factories. So I have been engaged with the factory management since last 7 years, since I'm working with these issues. So what they said is they do not have budget provisions for that. I'm not focusing anybody. This is maybe it's not about this. I have been talking with kind of majority of the people who have owned governments in Sri Lanka. So I think Sri Lanka is benefiting from GST plus benefit as well. So none of these benefits are going to the workers. So I think even during the pandemic period, also factory owners pocketed their the profit that they earn. So how they can say that they do not have enough money or enough budgetary allocation to establish daycare centers, especially when it's come to North Province, they are traveling all far away from the villages to the town. Since most of them are women-headed households in the North Province, they have been affected from the war as well. So sometimes they have to let their children learn at home. So how, I don't know how they are kind of making their mind to come and work properly or work with a very peaceful mind to give their daily target or daily production target or anything. So I just wanted to say that workers are just surviving from 16,500 of minimum national wage in Sri Lanka. So now there are order cancellation in majority of the government factories, and they are not giving any overtime payments. I mean, we are not demanding overtime, we are demanding a proper living wage for our workers actually. So I will now come to my question, otherwise. So actually the childcare is a right and a shared responsibility of all of us, and it is crucial to recognize children as a kind of a cornerstone of the future labor force, and also it contributes to the national economic growth as well. There is an immediate benefit for everyone when the government and employees step up to help with childcare. It makes a big difference right away. Women can work more, I think, when they earn and when they become financially independent. I think they automatically become empowered. So when it's come to government industry, most of the women now, even though they are majority of them are 85% of them are women, but most of them are getting violence, or they are victims of gender-based violence from their intimate part. So why this is happening is they have kind of very lack of awareness about the violence that's happening to them and their rights as well. So we know that in Sri Lanka, we talk about this several times, the labor force is less than 35% when it's come to women. But when we consider about university students, pass out graduates, a majority of our women, I think. So what is happening after that? So these people are just, I think, leaving their jobs, or they are just stopping because of their family issues or cultural barriers. I mean, this is just quite different to the Z generation. I'm not talking about the Z generation because I'm just talking about the government industry and the other industries. So when it comes to childcare rights, it's important for both government and the employers to play active roles, and creating a fair and supportive, decent working environment for the parents as well. For the state, we would like to suggest, I think it is a must to advocate for universal access to childcare facilities and making them affordable and high quality for all families. I think it is regardless of income. Additionally, pushing for extended and paid parental leave for both parents will help them to bond with their children and transition back to work smoothly. We know we do not have a paternity leave in Sri Lanka. Some companies are providing something, but only the maternity leave is approved in Sri Lanka according to the maternity benefit ordinance as well. And also the employer should consider the implementing flexible working environmentals such as flexible arrangements, remote work options, and job sharing arrangements as well. And if possible, on-site childcare facilities should also be established within the factories, so that the majority of the developed countries have this possibility in their working environment, so that parents are aware that my child is safe with me. So, and also in terms of work protection, it is crucial to have kind of strong anti-discrimination policies in place to a fair treatment for all employees regardless of parental status. But keeping these policies is not going to work. There should be an implementation and monitoring mechanisms as well. So because in Sri Lanka we do have a lot of policies and procedures, but when it comes to implementation, it is zero. And when it comes to monitoring mechanisms, that is also, I think, minus. So when it comes to gender inclusivity, we should normalize and celebrate this parental leave for the fathers, acknowledging that they are also an important role for the child care facilities and responsibilities as well. And it is also crucial to promote, especially when it's come to grassroots level, that this child care is a shared responsibility of both father and mother. And additionally, we should focus on holistic well-being programs as well. This means providing resources for parents to manage stress, especially when it's come to mother. Stress is a big issue when it's come to after giving a birth to a child. And the mental health, recognize the unique challenges that they face, and the workshops and seminars on effective time management. That is also beneficial for parents to have kind of balance their professional and personal lives as well. And finally, I would like to say that creating a supportive environment for this child is not about policies. It is all about fostering a kind of cultural shift towards a more inclusive and kind of creating this decent work environment on workers. But
Sorry.
This is some time at the end.
Okay, fine. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. So I want to now give the floor to Shanika Barakote. Shanika, some more questions for you. And I think maybe Dan can relate you to some of the things that you might be talking about. But what I'd like you to do is give a brief description of the national policy on early childhood care and development and the national policy for child care centers, which were formulated by the Women's Ministry, which, by the way, in the proposed budget has got a 5% cut, if I'm not mistaken. Education and health have not, but the Women's Ministry has got a 5% cut. And are still in the draft stages. So what are some of the changes these policies will bring? What do you think will be the difficulties in implementing them? And what are the barriers in finalizing these policies? I'd also like you, in your response, to think about what we in this room can do to push things forward.
Thank you very much, Professor. I'm really happy to be in this forum because I think this will be a privilege to discuss about the policy, these two very important and significant policies which many of us are waiting to see these policies and implementation of these policies. Actually, Ministry of Women, Child Affairs and Social Empowerment Ministry, as a ministry, it works with multifaceted stakeholders. So we are, as a ministry, we are privileged to have this policy, and this is the national policy on early childhood care and development. So luckily we have this policy, and under this policy we have 9 strategies, as well as these days we are working on this 5-year action plan as well, because with having this policy itself will not provide anything for the betterment of the children. So we have, as a ministry, we have understood that it's needed to have the policy itself, and it's not sufficient itself. But in addition to these policies, we want to have some strategies to implement these policies to the grassroots level. So with this policy, we have developed a 5-year action plan to this national policy. These days, we have finalized all the things, and most probably within next month time, we will be able to see this implementation of 5-year action plan. Because with the 5-year action plan, we have worked with so many government stakeholders, as well as INGOs, NGOs, as well as private sector stakeholders. But we know that working with these stakeholders are not sufficient enough, because we want to, since the early childhood care and development is very crucial and very important to the country as well as to the nation. So as a policy itself, we want to work with practical scenarios, because we know that there are so many levels in the country. For example, state sector, urban sector, rural sector, as well as other so many emerging social levels are coming. So we want to address to all these factors through these policies as well as implementation levels. In addition to this national policy, these days Ministry is working with the very important national policy for child daycare centers. Before the child daycare centers policy, National Child Protection Authority has developed national guideline for child daycare centers in Sri Lanka. So we are privileged to have these guidelines. Because of this guideline, many of the daycare centers could improve the facilities and the quality of the daycare centers in the country. As we know, in this guideline, we are discussing about 3 types of daycare centers. daycare centers, workplace daycare centers, as well as private or home daycare centers. So these three types of daycare centers are really important because we are discussing about the 4 months child to 12 years child. So since we all are aware about child who is under 18 years of age, so we want to cover 4 months to 12 years child through this policy, as well as the 5-year action plan. So in this policy, as a ministry, we want to address to the SDG goal number 8, especially the SDG 8.7. We want to address this together with SDG goal 8.7. We are looking into SDG goal number 4 as well as SDG goal number 5. Because these SDGs are to be addressed to a large extent. In addition to these national guidelines, actually we are very happy to say that National Policy for Child Daycare Centers will be ready by next month, because these days we have, as a ministry, this policy has forwarded to the Ministry of Finance to get the observation from the Finance Ministry. Once we got the observation from the Finance Ministry, we will be able to table in the cabinet. So I'm sure that we are fighting to put these policies to be launched at before next year. Because we know that this is very important, as well as this will be the turning point for many sectors. It's not facilitate to the decent work, but it will support to the child protection, and it will support to the well-being of the children, and not only that, it will support to the development of the country. So when we take all these things together, I think it's a national responsibility of all of us. On the one side, as children, as we know, they have rights. So we want to create the environment to enjoy their rights within their childhood. In addition to that, we want to give the high quality childcare centers to enjoy their development at their later ages. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And let me now open the floor for discussion, and also, feel free to discuss with each other as well. Go ahead, Risha.
So I have a question from Ms. I was looking at this child care daycare policy. So one problem that I saw is to implement that, you have to coordinate with a lot of different institutions, because it is at the provincial level, coordinate vertically and horizontally. Just to, I think you have to send like 50 letters just to have one saying something like that. Yes. So, is there a way to streamline it? I mean, this is one reason why this is not going forward. It's just coordinating is so difficult.
Dr. Delini, actually, do you want to answer it, or do you want to take a few more questions? Do you want to?
Yeah, I think Marasari in national planning, I want to take another emerging issue for everyone. We are looking at now child care, but there will be elder care also, and that is emerging now, and our population are aging. What would be another challenge for us coming years? And we have to about child plus the elderly as well, and our population are not growing much that fast earlier, and only one child managed to 12 mother and father, as well as the husband, mother and father. For elders, there will be another issue to be discussed coming years, and that is one of the area. And the labor force participation versus decent. We have to balance both for my give not only decent work, but also we have to look at the women force participation. How we are going to balance both? That's one of my question. I'm from the government, but I agree with Gayani. We have a lot of policies, a lot of strategies. The implementation is a challenging part for us, and also monitoring. Yes, as I fully agree with you, and we have a challenge for not only implementation, one side of it, and also the finance, where we can get the finance to implement those policies and strategies. Government itself might not be able to do it. We have to have a collaborate action with the private sector, and also civil society has a lot of support and can be contribute, and the public. We are looking at some of the area. Public can do lot, but we have to educate public. We have to aware public why we want to do it. Why we may need to go for a work. We have to do it. That is our entire country has to drive everyone, not only government, public sector. Everyone. Yes.
Thank you. At the back, please introduce yourself.
I'm Madhu. From Represent Union.
Your mic on?
Madhu Madhavan.
Ma'am, you can use your mic.
Yes. I'm Madhu Madhavan. I'm representing a decent union. We basically represent garment sector workers. Actually, I want to make a point that with the prevailing situation, with all these impact of pandemic and the economic crisis and everything, at the moment there are 30,000 workers who are working in the private sector, apparel garment factories, have lost their jobs, I think permanently and temporarily, because I think recently there were two factories were closed in Kimnochi. It's nearly 7,000 workers. They were working in those two factories. So in terms of the decent work, I would like to touch only two principles of decent work. One is the secure employment. So under that, now workers are losing their jobs. So how the decent work or the policies can prevent these job losses through or as a one of the initiative of practicing the decent work.
Thank you. Let me get back to the panelists and then there are more questions will take them later.
Thank you very much. Dr. Nisha, you asked about the critical situation of the stakeholders of those who are related to childcare and development sector. Yes, actually it's a challenging as well as very critical, complex situation, because we know that in childcare and development there are so many stakeholders are involved into this. But as a ministry, as institution, we know that without having consultations or without having taken the ideas into practice, we won't be able to implement these practical things to the children. Because we know that as National Child Protection Authority, we are receiving so many complaints related to children and childcare, as well as very challenging scenarios to the child protection. So with having all these things, we are working very closely with not only with the government sector but also with the private public partnership programs, as well as INGOs, as well as media and civil workers, civil sectors, because if we are not touching all these stakeholders, we won't be able to practice or we won't be able to establish real childcare and development to the children. yes, we have understood it, then we are focusing it.
The last question.
No, I can.
I would agree with, I'm sorry, I couldn't remember your name.
I'm the National Plan Kumar.
Okay, cool, Mr. Kumar Singh. Okay, so thank you very much for agreeing with me. So when you talk about the civil society responsibility, I think since last 30 to 40 years, civil society is playing a major role in the society to fulfill the gap that government cannot provide to the citizens of the country. So at the beginning, we heard that these people are getting money from the diaspora, they do not have anything to do with their money. But now the scenario is totally changed because of the COVID-19 pandemic and also of the economic crisis. Since civil society organizations and the NGOs actually work more on this, we are labor women's organizations, but I'm talking about the real scenario. So I think so. If the government can fulfill the gap when it comes to infrastructure or providing houses or providing healthcare facilities to their citizens, why they cannot get the support of the civil society organizations to implement and monitor these policies which has been adapted? So if we do not have money, I think we should not develop a policy as well. So because we have to concentrate on the financial aspects as well. So I think from my experience, we were talking with few of the women. I want to say I'm not fingering at anyone, but I just want to talk about my experience. And when we talk about few of the women development officers from one of the biggest district in Sri Lanka, and we wanted to create a kind of active and which is a live database where we can find gender violence cases and what has happened to them and who has it referred to and what is the follow-up process. And I have contacted with them for 7 times. I mean, I'm talking about last year. And they were saying continuously that we have a database, but we never have had a look at that. And they even don't know how to update that as well. So I think civil society is playing a major role in the country as well and the government as well. But so they should seek the support of the civil society organizations for this implementation of the policy and monitoring as well. And Madhu, can I ask the question as well? I think Anuja can also answer that question. So Madhu, I think we both are working in the same sector. So they are also representing the largest trade union in the free trade zone and garment factory area. So I mean, when it's come to this job security and the decent work, I wanted to say that the principle of the decent work is freedom of association and assembly in Sri Lanka, which is the most violated right in Sri Lanka at the moment. So we do have, we have that in Constitution Article 14 is the freedom of association and assembly. But in the garment industry, the organized percentage of the unionization is less than 4%. So why is this? So people do not have a place to negotiate. People do not have a place to talk about their issues. I don't think that joint consultation committees or workers' compliance committees or workers' representatives committees will do this because we have two experiences that when the international fashion brand audits come to the factories, the managers are asking their friendly employees to go and answer the question of the auditors. So where is the accountability and the transparency of these audits, social audits? And when we talk about the human rights due diligence, we always demanding that this should also be transparent and accountability. So I mean, Madhu, when it's come to the securing the employment rights, I mean, there should be a space where workers can negotiate with their employers. There should be a tripartite dialogue. So I mean, the security, most of them are telling that they're not getting orders, they are not getting such things. But we know, since we are working in the ground, people now, the majority of the factories are trying to reduce their workforce and get the maximum output from a minimum workforce so that they do not have to pay compensations. I mean, this is kind of a shot came from the proposed labor law reforms as well. So even though this is not approved, the employers are now implementing this proposed labor law reforms that they are practicing. I mean, that if they can increase their night working shift up to 15 days per month and the overtime to 80 hours per month, and if a worker has to work until 12 hours per day, and even if they can increase it up to 16 hours without even overtime. So what will happen? What is happened to the work-life balance of a worker, female worker, I mean. So they are just having another 12 hours to do the homework, they are be with their children, their social work and everything. So no one is talking about their social work. So I mean, when it's come to even a machine operator, even a supervisor, even a person who is cleaning the road, they also have some responsibility towards the society. So if a machine operator is standing and working in an ironing section, not a machine operator, if a worker is doing ironing in the factory, so how she can survive with the high heat of this ironing and everything with the 12 hours? So this is not going to. I mean, this is another. I mean, this is another kind of discussion. So about the proposed labor law reforms. I mean, this is we are not against the labor laws. We are also demanding a proper labor law reform, which is worker friendly. Not is anti-labor law reform. Not is a kind of abolishing 40 labor laws and just taking it to one single labor law called unified labor law, which is very smart and everything. But there should be some certain of worker friendly thing, which is productive, or which is I mean, this is really feeling. Actually, this is a real feeling of mine. So when we read that whole document, I don't think that there is a space for equal right or equal opportunities. Equal right is not giving only the 9 hours working for the women. So there are more than that things that we should talk about, the equal rights and equal opportunities for women. So thank you, Madhu, for raising this question.
Thank you. First of all, in terms of job loss, and I think in terms of some of the comments that were made, I can only speak on behalf of the MANS. Business downturn is a real thing, and I think as we speak of the economy in Sri Lanka especially, the apparel sector and the contribution the apparel sector makes in terms of export earnings, we are facing a situation economically that we are going to have to deal with. In terms of job loss, there is a legal structure and a framework that should be followed, especially in countries like Sri Lanka. I think that it's not a hire fire policy, so there is a structure that needs to be adhered to. Any responsible company that has to, for business reasons, restructure, it's a matter of also looking at, you have a workforce of an X amount, how do you protect as many of them? How do you protect as many jobs as possible? How do you contribute to the economy of the country and keep going? So I can't comment on companies if they're not following the required regulation for those restructures, which require approval, which have to go through a process where you agree. Of course, some companies, of course, like ours, I can say that there is your legal regulated framework for what compensation should be, but we will decide whether we go above that. The point though is that making sure those regulations are followed, the frameworks are followed, and the law providing for that, I think, is what is necessary. You are not probably going to be able to have a successful business environment without laws that protect employers and employees. And if the business community fails, especially countries like Sri Lanka are really going to struggle, I mean, where we are right now. So as far as responsible companies go, I can talk about following the framework, going above and beyond the framework, and making sure people are actually safe and looked after and have a way of protecting themselves and their families, even if they are not employed in that particular company at that point. So compensation needs to be fair, probably more than fair. Beyond that, I'm not able to comment on your question. As for, of course, in terms of decent work, there are so many factors that come into play. And I do think that it's essential that safety is there, empowerment is there, and people have the right to decent workplaces, to be able to speak up if there's ever a grievance. All of those mechanisms need to be in place. And of course, we need to be practical about how we run businesses to be profitable, and make sure people business and human rights are maintained.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think time has caught up with us, but we can probably, if there are any burning questions, we can probably take maybe 2 questions more. No? Okay. Priyanti and well, very quickly, and we'll have very quick responses.
They're not really questions, I think they are sort of observations from this discussion. Firstly, I think this whole conversation, I think it came in the original presentation by RPS about decent work differs from normal work. I don't think that should be the case. I think all work should be decent work, and that's what we should strive for. So I think the thinking has to change, that we don't have, that if we are not providing decent work, then we are not providing work, a proper environment for people to work in. And related to that, I just want to, we had a lot of conversation about SDG 8 and SDG 5 and all of that. But we must not forget that the government of Sri Lanka has signed up to some international conventions which form the international law, which is like the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the Convention on all forms of eliminating all kinds of discrimination against women. And these, so the government has a state obligation. However, whether in collaboration with the private sector or civil society, to make sure, like Gani and many people have said already, to provide these decent work, to provide the protection, to provide the space for free and informed consultations, etc., right? And for as well, freedom of association. So it is not something that people are just demanding for because they're trying to be difficult. It is something that this government of Sri Lanka has already committed itself to, and I think as citizens of Sri Lanka, we have to hold the government accountable for these things. So that's really what I want to say.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the interesting discussion. I just want to know whether there was any coordination between the education sector. One thing is in shock like pandemic, they just closed down the schools and long time to reopen. Then this unpaid care work, like taking care of children is a working women, they have to leave sometimes. Other thing is follow in the school times in our keeping children until 3 or 4 p.m. in the school. Such possibilities, then I think if government can invest in the areas, it's a possibility that this unpaid burden can be reduced.
Would like to
Thank you for asking that question. Normally, as a Minister of Women and Child Affairs and Social Empowerment, Minister of Education is the one of the major stakeholder of the of us, because without Minister of Education, we can't think of the protection of care or development of the child. So definitely we consult with the Minister of Education, not only with the Minister of Education. In addition to that, we are working with the National Institute of Education and Education Commission. So with all these institutions, government institutions which are working with the working related to the education, yes, we are working with all these institutes and commissions.
Thank you very much. I think we have come to a natural end to this thing. Maybe as Nisha did, I will ask each person for one thought of less than 1 minute.
Ensure decent work by adhering all the 4 pillars which is published by the ILO.
I think we want to think,
I think we want to think about the child and their child development, care and protection more than the other subjects. For that, we want to allocate adequate budgets. It's not from the government end, but from all the stakeholders of the country and international organizations too.
For me, as we change laws and bring in frameworks and structures, I hope we recognize, of course, the practical issues in terms of the safety and all that is there, but try to move away from the patriarchal and paternalistic structures we've currently set up.
Excellent, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Gaini, Ms. Tanuja, Ms. Shanika, and Professor Nilini. Thank you, the audience also, for their questions and insights. And let me thank the presenters of the evening and members of the audience for the fruitful and engaging discussion. Your insights are extremely useful to our policy strategies and to further our findings of our study. Now, as we wind up the proceedings of the event, I would like to call upon Ms. Sunimali Madhuravala, Research Economist at IPS, to deliver a few concluding remarks.
Thank you, Kyoto. Good evening, everyone. I stand before you today with a heart full of gratitude as we bring the National Policy Conference on Women's Access to Decent Work in Sri Lanka, organized by the Institute of Policy Studies of Sri Lanka, to a close. It has been an inspiring and enlightening experience, and I want to take a moment to express our deepest appreciation to all those who made this event possible. First and foremost, I would like to extend our sincere gratitude to our distinguished panelists and moderators who generously shared their expertise, knowledge, and insights throughout this conference. Your contributions have added immense value to our event, our discussion, and your unwavering commitment to promoting women's access to decent work is truly commendable. I would also like to express our gratitude to our participants, both those who present in person and those who join us virtually. Thank you for accepting our invitation and for your active engagement and thoughtful questions. A special thanks goes to the media representatives who have joined us today, and we hope you will disseminate the key discussion points from today's event widely and contribute to the promotion and influence of policies that enhance women's access to decent work in Sri Lanka. A special word of thanks goes to IPS staff members who work tirelessly to ensure the smooth execution of this event. Last but not least, my sincere appreciation is extended to the Partnership of Economic Policy, PEP, and Co-Impact for their generous funding support, which made this conference a reality. With this, I conclude my vote of thanks and cordially invite you to enjoy the refreshment arranged outside the auditorium. Please help yourself to have some food before you leave. And thank you once again, and I hope you have a pleasant evening. Thanks.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, no, say. Take